My name is Victoria Kedis. I'm a manager and facilitator here at Family Smart. I'm also a mom of a transgender youth. I think the one thing that I'm really grateful for is how important the message is that he's taught me about getting to be who we truly are and becoming our true selves. This resource has been created for families that are stepping into this journey with their child that may have come out, and for caregivers because we know how challenging it can be to really discover and learn on our own. We also know our kids do better when the caring adults in their lives are supported. Sadly, our transgender children and youth are statistically at the higher risk of poor mental health. We hope that this video helps you to discover some truths to calm your fears and really understand and recognize the importance of your relationship and support of your young child. I am joined today by a number of different experts, and who are not only experts on this topic, but on themselves as well. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Thank you, Victoria. So my name is Constance Carrière-Prill, and I'm a parent. I currently live in Ontario, but I have lived previously in British Columbia as well. And I have 4 amazing kids who are now teens and young adults. And a number of our children are members of the LGBT community, and 2 are gender diverse. I am involved in a number of different organizations and committees throughout Ontario and British Columbia, and have been for about 6 years, that advocate for the needs of trans and gender diverse youth. And hopefully I can be of help in this conversation.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dan Metzger. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist at BC Children's Hospital. I've been here since 1993, so almost 30 years. And in 1998, I was asked to see a young man who was questioning his gender, and that wasn't part of my training at the point. That point was really not part of anybody's training at that point, but that sort of got the ball rolling for what has now become the gender clinic at Children's Hospital. So altogether, we're probably 800 patients in, I think, seeing kids and continuing to learn and do the best job we can with looking after this population of kids. The kids I see as an endocrinologist are kids who often are wanting to get more information about a medical transition.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist here in British Columbia. I work primarily out of Chilliwack, and I provide counseling services and assessment services to adolescents, children as well, and adults. Some primary conditions that I will work with are depression, anxiety, trauma as well, and gender dysphoria. And some of the assessments I do are also hormone readiness and surgery readiness assessments for clients. Another thing is I used to be one of the co-founding members of the Chilliwack Gender Care Society, and the Gender Support Network. We have provided support groups for transgender youth and non-binary youth in Chilliwack, not only to the children themselves, but to adults and their families. And so that's some work that's been carried on by other colleagues and community members, and they're doing some great work. But I was involved in the early stages of that several years ago.
Tor, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. One of the things my son has always shared with me is that he is not just his transgenderness, he is so much more. So I would love to hear a little bit about you. I know you're an activist and do a lot of that kind of work, but I'd also like to hear about Tor, what it's like to be you.
Yeah, I am a grade 12 student, and I hope to be going to university next year for a health and exercise sciences program. So I'm really into science. Also, another big thing in my life is powerlifting. So it's a strength-based sport. I was supposed to do a big competition soon, but I tore my ACL. So I will hopefully be back at that sooner rather than later because that is my jam. I love it so much. And then kind of my other biggest thing would be that I want to be a doctor one day. So I do a lot of work in that regards. I volunteer at the hospital. And I act as a volunteer patient for medical students, learning how to kind of interact with humans and apply everything they're learning. And so that's kind of my big dream.
Oh, that is incredible. What a powerful young man, powerlifting and being able to speak and support and help others. Thank you for that. One of our intentions with this tool is to really help get the foundations of transgendered across to parents and caregivers, but also that connection to mental health. What has that connection been for you to mental health, and what would you say to families when they think, is it really this challenging for our kids? Why is mental health such a big part of this, and why are the statistics so uncentering for us?
Yeah, I was one of many, many, many trans kids who had some serious struggles with my mental health because of it. My first kind of most prominent mental health issues started when I was like 7 or 8 years old. So that's grade 2 or 3. I was very young. I was in primary school still. And it started just, thinking I was kind of one of those kids that gets on your nerves a little bit because at school I would be this perfect, child that every teacher loved. They would write the nicest things about me to my parents. And then I'd come home every day and just lash out. I was mean. I would scream, kick, cry, the whole thing. And when my parents would ask me, like, why are you so great at school and then you lose your mind when you come home? I had no idea. I couldn't explain it. I was like, I don't know. It just happens every single time. And they were like, okay. And so we tried, to work on that a little bit, and we couldn't really get anywhere with it. And then when I was 9, I started struggling a lot with kind of depression and suicidal ideation. And I didn't really know what I was thinking because I was so young. I didn't really understand all the thoughts and feelings I had. So I resorted to what I knew best, which is tell my teacher things that I don't know. And so we had a test one day, and right before I handed it back, I just wrote that I wanted to jump out of a plane without a parachute because I didn't know how to word it better than that. And I handed it back to him. Next thing I knew, obviously my parents were called. I was down in the counselor's office, and everyone's, trying to figure out what's going on. And we kind of put the puzzle piece together that for the past many years, all this lashing out was anxiety that I was shoving down throughout the day to be a good student at school. And then the second I was home and I knew it was safe, bottle explodes. I would just kind of go crazy. And that was kind of my very first kind of interaction with, mental health struggles and with the mental health care world. And then since then, I've had my ups, I've had my downs. But it's definitely one of those things that you don't know what it's like until you're experiencing it. And I've tried a million different times to explain it and come up with different analogies, and there just isn't one that sticks well enough to describe the depth of it, because people don't necessarily realize how ingrained gender is into everything, especially when it's something you struggle a lot with. Because sure, there's the obvious ones about places where, gender or your body are relevant, things like, going to the washroom, things like, in PE class, in middle school, everything was broken up by boys and girls. And so if you're questioning your gender in middle school, that is brutal. Taking showers, those are all kind of the obvious ones. But then you see things that, people don't really consider, that either they're like, oh yeah, my gender is part of that, or they're like, how is your gender related to that? And you don't see it until it's something that's bothering you every day. Things like your music taste. If you are a trans guy like me and you have a bunch of, classic like girly songs in your playlist, you experience that like, oh, that am I being too girly right now? Like, should I put some more like music that I don't really like on here just because like guys think it's cool, things like that. That people often fail to consider is like even a thought. They're just like, oh, here's the songs I like, and they add them to their playlist. Um, and so I think that kind of chases you forever. It's one of those things that you can get the strategies and you can, transition however you see fit. But at the end of the day, you still have to go out in the world, and there's still going to be things that, nip at you. And so I think it's important for parents to kind of be mindful of that with their children, is that it's not just, when they're, waiting to have surgery, or when they're, taking a shower. It is all day, every day. It's when they're, writing. People have dysphoria about what their writing looks like. You know where they write every day? School. You know, things like that where it's like it's easy to miss how often it will impact your kid, because it's just so hard to grasp the understanding of how deeply ingrained gender is into somebody's perception of the world. And I think that can come with a lot of, mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, whatever it is that makes it just so much more impossible to go around the world and exist.
Thank you for that insight, Tora. And I'm sorry that every moment is filled with having to think about gender and how much we take that for granted as cisgender people. And I think about my journey and other families' journeys. Often when our kids come out to us, our first thought isn't doctor. Our first thought is, this is a choice, this is a mental health issue, this isn't something that we go to our doctors for. And so as I think about that, what would you want families to know as they begin this journey with their kids?
Yeah, so nobody really understands gender, but it's up here. It's in our brain, and often the way I'll explain to families is it's like being left-handed or right-handed. It's just like how your brain is wired, gay, straight. You like red, you like purple, you like green. Like, we don't understand really how our brain is wired in many ways, and gender is really part of that. Many kids are gender diverse and really have no problems. They can figure out a way to make themselves more comfortable with a social transition. But the kids I see as an endocrinologist are kids who often are wanting to get more information about a medical transition. Everybody that looks after trans little kids, youth, adults, really our goal is to make them the most comfortable that we can make them in the body that they have. And for some people that means seeing mental health folks to help them figure out what their journey is. A lot of the kids that we meet are quite young, and so they don't necessarily have all the right words or the right concepts yet. So our mental health colleagues are super important in that way. Some kids are quite dysphoric or quite anxious, depressed. Some kids experience non-acceptance at school, at home, at work, amongst their friends, amongst their family, amongst their community. And so that's really where the mental health folks can be so helpful, is to provide the family and the kid with ways of coming to a better acceptance and to kind of do whatever sort of a transition that is safe and acceptable for that kid.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate the difference that it's not something, it's like being left or right-handed. We're not coming at this from a place of kids are choosing this not easy path.
One of the first things I learned is, like, who would choose that path? It's not an easy path, right? It's a path that you have to take because that's what your brain is telling you. It's not a choice. We don't choose to be left-handed or right-handed. If we choose the wrong one, it doesn't work very well. This is really brain wiring.
Yeah, and we can't change our brain, but we can change our bodies to align with it. So grateful for that.
There's a huge societal misperception, which I think I referred to earlier, that this somehow, being trans, lies in the mental health world, and it does not. But there is a huge correlation between being gender diverse and having experience of mental health issues, and that is simply because of the difficulty of that journey. The amount of discrimination that trans people face, the amount of difficulty and challenges, the amount of rejection they face from family and from community. And so those kind of things, any person, trans, cis, or otherwise, any person experiencing those kind of challenges in their life will find themselves increasingly experiencing, or at risk of experiencing, mental health issues. And so it's important to be aware that your child, you may be able to give all the love and support in the world to your child. They may still struggle with mental health issues. It is very, very common for trans kids, that kind of thing. For me, I wanted to go directly to the medical community. It was made very clear to me early on, this was something that fell in the medical realm. This was not a mental health issue. This was not, a social issue. This was a medical issue that I needed to understand how it impacted my child and what kind of ways I could support them in it. And so I went to my family doctor, and that's a conversation parents need to have, and understanding if your family doctor is somebody who has been trained in trans health. Not all of them are.
No major medical association identifies being transgender as a mental disorder. So being transgender, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender diverse, gender itself is really on a spectrum. And wherever you fall on that spectrum, it's a beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with that. We should accept that, rejoice, and enjoy that. But what we do see is that it's the gender dysphoria itself that some individuals will experience. That is the medical disorder. And with that can also come mental health challenges as well, especially if it is left untreated.
So as a mom, I remember back in our beginnings when my son came out, and I think about all the things that I'd heard and all the things I'd seen on TV. Internet wasn't really as big part of our lives then, but there was so much misinformation I was gaining, and that was the thing that was feeding my fears. I'm wondering, what are some of the misconceptions that are on top of mind for you as young people?
I think probably the biggest one, especially right now with the prominence of social media and those kind of things, is people thinking that you can be convinced to be trans or convinced to be cis, and that's just not the case. I know a lot of people who definitely would not choose to be trans if it had been a choice, because it is such a difficult journey to go on. And so I think, keeping in mind that this isn't something someone on TikTok convinced your kid to do, and it's not, something that their friend group is peer pressuring them into doing. It's a very personal thing, and it's something that I'm sure they have thought long and hard about and spent a lot of time considering and weighing the benefits from. And if it's come to the point where they have come out, it's one of those things that they know is going to stick with them, or at least is something that is meaningful enough to try and explore.
Being transgender or non-binary, it's not a choice. Being educated about that is not going to change who your authentic self is. And studies just do not support that. And furthermore, what studies are supporting that, especially at that puberty stage or later, and if a child, even in their childhood, has a persistent, consistent, and insistent gender identity that they are reporting to their families, that it is almost likely going to be a stable and lasting identity. So that is what we are seeing. And again, it's not influenced or persuaded by other people, and not typically that temporary phase, especially at that puberty stage.
So in terms of myths, I would say one of the biggest ones was the fear that my children would change their minds. My child would change their mind, that they this is a phase, all their other friends are doing it. And I think, it's a common fear, but it is a myth. The evidence doesn't support that. A lot of people like to quote these, studies that, back in the day, which showed X, Y, or Z, and that's just not supported in the evidence. If you speak to a doctor, you speak to a pediatrician, you speak to anybody who works with trans youth, the evidence says to support your child and believe them. If your child tells you this is who they are today, believe them. The chance of them changing their mind down the road is very, very small. And I remember one person saying to me, and if that happened, so what? What's the worst case scenario here? So you have to do more paperwork if they've changed their name. So they stop wearing a binder if you've bought them a binder. So they grow their hair back, whatever the case may be. So thinking of, there is no downside to supporting your child here, but there's a huge downside to not supporting your child.
And in thinking of that, I think about families that think about their young children, 4 and 5 and 6 years old, and they question, is my child the best person to make, how can they make this decision? How can they know? What would you say to those about our kids being the best source of information when it comes to their gender?
Kids can know from a really young age, just innately, instinctively, without anybody telling them who they are. And so accepting that concept understanding that I knew myself as a child. My kids know themselves as children, and following their lead in terms of what they were telling me they needed. And I think that gave me direction as a parent in knowing what resources to seek out to help support them, which avenues we needed to look into, because they were sharing that with me. And I think a message to parents is be very grateful if your child is sharing this with you. Be grateful, because a lot of children don't feel safe enough to share this with their parents. Understanding that comes, with that comes a tremendous amount of responsibility. And understanding that if I am the person they feel safe telling this to, then it's my job to create a safe place for them. So I think in the beginning, that was really where my head was at, is listening to my children, creating a safe environment where they could talk about these things, listening to what they were telling me they needed, and then me going out and doing my due diligence, talking to whoever I needed to speak to professionally to make sure that we were establishing a system of the right resources and supports in accordance with what my kids were saying they needed.
So we often hear about this, and by learning and understanding gender development theories and research from reputable sources, you would see that actually by age 6, a child does have an understanding of what their gender is. Yes, for the majority of children, they will be cisgender. However, we do see that transgender youth can genuinely know by age 5 even that they are transgender. But unfortunately, yes, there is this kind of this misconception around that, and questioning how does that child really know if that's the case. Yet if a cisgender child says that they're a boy or a girl, nobody questions them. So yes, at an early age, your child might come out as transgender, or maybe they're displaying some kind of gender non-conforming behaviors, and they might be creative in expressing who they are and what their gender is. And so just be open to that. Be open to exploring that, and again, to have that flexible home environment that is supportive and is going to be accepting of that child, regardless of where they are in their gender journey. So listen to them, meet them where they are at in their exploration, and just kind of support them as they're figuring themselves out along the way.
I can totally understand parents who are, a little bit nervous when it comes to putting their faith in a very, very young kid, because most of us vaguely remember being that age, and the memories are mostly like playing and running and being weird and silly. Um, but I think when it comes to gender, it's important to remember that that is such an ingrained part of your identity in our society. And if your kid has kind of come to the senses that what you're telling them with their gender isn't what they're feeling, they've hit this level of maturity already, that if they can be self-aware enough to realize that there's a mismatch somewhere, they're self-aware enough to be right about it. And I think just kind of understanding that, yeah, sure, young kids, they want to lie to you for fun because they think it's cool and they just learned how to do it. And they convince themselves they are dinosaurs and princesses and all sorts of different things. But at the end of the day, as much as that kid will be adamant that even without the costume on, they are still a dinosaur, they eventually will give up, and they'll be like, yeah, I know. I just want to pretend I'm a dinosaur. They won't give up about their gender. They will argue and fight and keep going. It's because they know at the end of the day that being a dinosaur is make-believe, and at the end of the day, they know that their gender is not. And, their depth of that understanding is rather minimal because they're young, but they do know it. And so I think kind of being mindful of the fact that just listen, your kid knows your kid better than anyone else. They're the only person who can hear their thoughts inside their head. And I think kind of just keeping that in mind is really important, to know that they are, your first source of information. And then obviously, because they are young, reaching out to people who specialize in this field, reaching out to mental health workers, whether that be psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, therapists who have worked with transgender youth. Maybe your primary care physician, if they've, had some experience working with trans people. There are programs in BC. We have Transcare BC that helps you navigate the entire big, difficult medical world for trans people. And so I think when it comes to personal understanding, your kid's going to know better than anyone, no matter their age. But obviously, there comes a point where your kid is too young to know what is going on in the outside world, and that's when it's, the time to seek some help from professionals in the field.
So as a mom with transgender youth, I think about all the things I had to learn in the beginning, and there was a lot that I had to learn quickly, and all while trying to navigate a system that had some really big barriers to my son getting the care he needed and deserved. So as parents, what are some of the things that we can do and pay attention to so we can support our trans children well?
I think a lot of us have to learn the hard way what works and what doesn't work. And at the end of the day, any fears and worries and anxieties I needed to set aside and deal with those in my own time and make sure my focus was on supporting my children and what they needed. And what they needed and what I thought they needed were two different things. And so I had to learn, I think like most parents do, to really listen to my kids, to understand that they know themselves better than I ever could know them, regardless of their age.
I think of my son and how it was so obvious to me, and it was easy to do the right thing because it made sense. It was that disconnect that even we as parents felt, and we didn't know what we didn't know. And I'm always grateful that he was able to come. And I think now at how he can thank us for being so supportive of him, because he's got a lot of peers that aren't getting that support. I'm wondering, what have your parents done well that has made this journey that much, I wouldn't say easy, but better for you?
My parents, I like to brag about them. They did kind of all the right things and much, much more. I'd say kind of the best thing my parents did for me when I first came out, and even to this day, is that I was always priority number one. There was never a doubt in my mind, when I was 10, 11 years old when I came out, that I was not the leader of the group and I was not, less than, right? And so they just made sure that their feelings were here and my feelings were over here. And so anytime I had struggles or concerns, or hopes or wants, those were dealt with, while behind the scenes, my parents were dealing with their feelings. My parents were, talking with each other. They were accessing support from the community, from people they knew, from grown-up trans people, from the internet a lot, because it is a wonderful source of information. They were doing that while I was at school, or while I was asleep, or while I was at, football practice. They weren't doing it while I was sitting at the kitchen table with them. They weren't interrogating me about what it means to be trans. And I think that was so meaningful for me, because when I was, struggling so much, I didn't also have to, parent my parents. They were dealing with their feelings and were able to be very brave and just take the leap of faith and be like, we're going to trust that he knows what he's talking about, and we're going to do it. We're going to call all the doctors. We're going to call all the therapists. We're going to get on all the wait lists, and we're going to do it. We're going to trust that he's right now until we can talk to somebody who can help us further. And, I respect them so deeply for that, because I can understand how terrifying that is to look at a little 11-year-old kid and be like, yeah, you're the smartest person I know. And it's hard to believe that. But when it comes to gender, that is often the case, is that the kid who's telling you is the smartest person you know. And so I think they kind of just being able to sit with my own feelings and struggle with everything I was going through and question my own gender and question everything around me on my own without added stress of other people was so crucial, because there will always be very difficult feelings when a kid comes out as transgender. There will be grief, there will be fear, there will be a million different things, and that is completely normal. But it's also completely normal that your kid does not know that's happening, because, like we talked about, your stress levels might be here, but your kids are through the roof.
So there's plenty of research now that shows that how well kids do is based on support of their adult loved ones. So parents, grandparents, teachers, people, adults that people will look up to, and you don't have to completely understand as a parent what's going on without affirming to your kid that this is what you're thinking, this is how you're feeling, we will get you some help. I don't understand yet how this all works. I haven't heard of this, or I don't know very much about this. My ideas are like formed from the wrong places. But just telling a kid that, okay, let's work on this. Let's get you the proper help that you need. Let's have you talk to the right people, maybe see the right doctors, maybe get the right medications, and also to understand what's going on. Just as if your child was, say, diagnosed with diabetes, you have to learn about diabetes. You have to learn how that all works, what the treatments are, different options. It's the same when your kid tells you that they're questioning their gender, they have gender diversity, and you just need to inform yourself how best to help kids look after that.
Yeah. So the most crucial thing that parents can really do is to allow their child to be exactly who they are, to create a supportive and flexible environment for them to be themselves, to explore who they are. And ultimately, this can help lead to emotional well-being that is improved. And it is important, like, of course, in the community, if there is transphobia, there is discrimination, this family environment and the support from family can help safeguard children from what they may face, those hardships in the real world. So the harassment and discrimination. So it is something that parents can do.
I know that I've spoken with many families, and there's a lot of fears and a lot of misinformation that they've received that are feeding those fears. One of the things that I hear often is that kids now can just go out and get hormones just by going to their doctor and saying I'm trans, and there's no process in place. So that really scares parents from being able to move forward and really stops them, because now they're just afraid and won't support something that they don't understand. So thinking of that as a myth and a misunderstanding, can you speak to that? And are there any other myths that you can think of that families could benefit from knowing about as you speak?
I think that that fear is out there, that the process seems a bit fast for some people. We have international guidelines from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, WPATH. We have brand new guidelines that tell us, the best way to look after little kids, to look after youth, to look after older people, adults and older people. And with this latest set of standards, we actually have more evidence, like clinical evidence, published studies that say that what we're doing is right. We don't know everything yet. We have to be the first people to admit that. But the guidelines are very clear that, particularly for youth, that they need to have an assessment of before each of the sort of bigger steps that they might take. An assessment is, we always have a hard time with this word assessment. It sounds like a test. But really someone who's going to sit with you, speak with you, find out what your gender journey is about, and someone who has qualifications, right? So many family doctors, for instance, don't have the time or the expertise to sit and have a prolonged conversation, and also they're not going to be comfortable prescribing hormones, although this is becoming more and more common amongst adults. The guidelines are pretty clear. You need to have a good background in the psychosocial development of youth, adolescents. How does the adolescent brain work? You need to have a good understanding of the laws in British Columbia, how that works, because we have specific court rulings that have guided us how this can work. You have to have a specific understanding of the medications. You have to have a specific understanding really of what consent and capacity means in a teenager. Is a teenager able to make decisions for themselves, with or without their parents? Obviously, ideally, there would be parents on side. So it becomes quite complicated, and I know a lot of family doctors or other people who just don't necessarily have the time or the expertise, don't feel comfortable doing that. They feel comfortable supporting their kids, saying, we can give those injections here, we can help you get the blood taken, we can help you organize this, transportation, things like that. But we are lucky in British Columbia that we do have a community of people, family doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, clinical counselors, social workers, and then various medical practitioners who really have like stepped up and learned what they need to learn to help us provide care, not just at Children's Hospital, but really across the province. And there's some really excellent community practices that have taken on looking after trans folks of all ages, including teens.
Any final thoughts of things that you would want parents or caregivers to know of their trans youth or child that you want to pass on?
I would say the other areas impact that I know I personally witnessed and have witnessed with other people's children as well, and talking to other families, is the potential for escalation in mental health issues in the wait, in the periods of waiting. So your child has come out to you, they're on their journey, maybe they have a medical team, and now they're waiting to talk to a doctor about perhaps having hormone therapy, perhaps having surgery, any kind of medical support that they may need or want to have that is incredibly important to their sense of well-being. The wait for those things is a reality in our medical system. It can take time. It can take months to get in to see a doctor. It could take a year before you start HRT. It can take longer. There are processes in place and requirements. And as an adult, we understand this. We understand this about our medical system. But when you're a child and you have waited so long to share the secret and you finally get to be who you are, there's an eagerness and an urgency to getting these things done for your child. And so that wait can be incredibly difficult for them mental health wise. So be mindful if you're supporting your child through that period of time, be sensitive to that, be understanding to that. I think that's quite important, advocate as much as you can, for things to happen, as quickly as possible, but be there for your child, offer them extra love and support during the wait, because that's going to be a tremendously difficult time for them. It's normal to be afraid, because we're afraid of things that we don't know or understand. And if you look at it from that lens, don't be worried that you might have fears and concerns, but take that as an indication to you that you need to get some education around this so that you can understand it, and that education will absolve some of those fears. So I think the key advice I would give to parents in this regard is make sure you're taking your education from knowledgeable, appropriate sources. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of hatred and intolerance against trans people. There's a lot of people with agendas of intolerance. And so understanding, if you're reading an article, what is that source? What is that source's history of supporting LGBTQ people?
Another very common myth that I see, and it's quite harming, is the myth of what's called the rapid onset gender dysphoria. So this is a condition or a label that is used to describe adolescents or young adults who have no prior indication of gender dysphoria, who are now suddenly coming out as transgender or having gender dysphoria. And it's the belief that they are doing this because of social influences, because of peers, exposure to transgender information. What we do see and what is recognized is something called late onset gender dysphoria. So yes, it is actually quite common for gender dysphoria to present later at that puberty stage or after puberty, because it does make sense, because prior to puberty, children may not have, developed sexual characteristics that are those secondary sex characteristics. And as such, they don't have any anatomic dysphoria. But once puberty hits, this is where you do see those characteristics starting to develop, becoming more pronounced. And as a result, there can now be this incongruence between one's gender identity and their somatic sex. And that in and of itself is often a central feature in diagnosing gender dysphoria, according to the DSM for adolescents. I also wanted to note that transgender youth, they may not even experience gender dysphoria or other mental health symptoms. Actually, specifically, we see those who do have strong family support and support not only in their home environment, but at schools, with their peers, and in their communities. These individuals, these youth, are found to be quite resilient, and they are emotionally well adjusted. So we may not even see, don't assume that if someone is transgender that they have mental illness, that they are struggling, because when they do have these protective factors in place, they are quite resilient and emotionally well adjusted. So I think that's important for parents to acknowledge as well.
When I think back to my beginnings with my son, and I embraced so much that that's who he was, but I was really surprised as a parent how much grief and sadness I felt. The life I had pictured for our family and for my child wasn't the same anymore, and there needed to be some adjustment on my behalf as a mom. And with all of our family, we had a lot to depart and impart onto our other loved ones in our family, and we're so grateful that they joined us with open arms in this journey as well. When I think about the grief I felt, and it took a long while to figure out that's what was going on, that it was me having to say goodbye to what I thought my child was, and really join him where he is, and this beautiful young man he's become. I'm so grateful for the insights and the support I was able to give all the way along. When I think about that as parents, and I consider all the fears that we have to look aside, all the barriers we have to come to finding the right services. I also have to really forgive myself for all the times I didn't listen to who he was. So this is our journey too. What do you want parents to know about really supporting themselves as we walk this with them?
My family doctor helped me locate resources at a children's hospital that had a gender diversity clinic, where I was able to meet with a social worker and a physician, and doctors who work with trans youth, trans kids, so they had the knowledge that I needed to hear. So seeking those resources out, going to organizations that work with trans youth, so they have tremendous amount of resources. So finding your resources in the right place. The other best thing I ever did was ask to speak to another parent, because information is one thing. Understanding your fears, might be, overblown is another, or feeling like you're not sure if you're allowed to feel how you're feeling. But being able to speak to another person who had been there was really important to me, because that was the point where I realized we're going to be okay, that this is different, this is new, and this feels scary. But on the other side of that is just a beautiful, amazing life where I'm supporting my kid and they're happy, and there's a lot that can be done to help them from where we are now to getting to that space. Knowing everything was going to be okay was really important. So I say to parents, everything's going to be okay. This is different. It is new for you, but remember, this is not new for your child. I think it's important for parents to know that no trans child walks this journey alone. This is a journey you're walking with them. You're going to have your own feelings, your own thoughts about it. However valid you may eventually feel those feelings were, a lot of parents look back, like you just said, and see, geez, I wish I had done this differently or that differently. But it's a journey. And I think it's important for parents to give themselves some breathing room to insert themselves in a place emotionally where they can enter that journey in a positive way. And what I mean by that is making sure you have your own support systems to work through your thought processes, your feelings, your issues. I think I see it quite commonly that parents tend to put their feelings on their trans child. If their child wants a name change or comes out and the parents say, oh my goodness, I'm grieving, or I'm, that name means so, all of these things, that name means so much to me. Those may be very valid feelings that you have, but we have to understand that there could be a mental health impact to putting those feelings on our child whose journey is already difficult enough as it is. and where they just need you to be their safe place, they can't also bear the brunt of your own feelings about this. And so the validity in those feelings needs to have its appropriate place in terms of how you can start to work through them. So get a support system, talk to another parent of a trans child. That's really important. Engage with online forums. There are lots of great online support groups for parents of trans and gender diverse kids as they start to walk this journey with their children. Educate yourself, and eventually as you walk through that journey, your feelings are going to change. And this is, again, back to that point of this absolutely gets better. You're not going to feel 6 months from now the way you feel today. 6 months from now, you're going to feel more settled, more used to things. You're going to, believe it or not, come to a point of time in your life where you will look at your child and it will be so bizarre to think of them as another gender or another name.
I think that as providers, we have to be mindful of what the parents are going through. They are losing, in a way, their child, and they're getting a new child. There is always a sense of loss that happens, a sense of, wow, my kid is like running full ahead, and here I'm kind of like straggling behind. I've known a few kids from my non-gender practice who've transitioned, and then it strikes me as like, oh my God, I have to change their pronouns. Oh my God, I have to change what I've known this kid since they were little, and all of a sudden I see a little bit of what parents go through, and it is much tougher than when I just meet a kid who's transitioned and I learn their new name, their new pronouns. I don't have to think about their previous life. I think find support. There's really good support systems out there for families, for parents. Talk to other families. Do some reading. Get yourself aware of what's going on, and know that you're not alone.